We are here. It is March, so it's time for another few weeks of nonstop studying and research to help us find super important trends for our brackets. I did this for the first time last year, and the videos did super well, and some of our findings actually turned out to be pretty good for helping us with our brackets, so let's go on ahead and just do it again. Quick things to preface before every thing in this video. I have a bracket pool just like last year on CBS Sports. One free pool where it's entry, no need to pay, and the winner will receive $30 for free. I did it last year as well. And then I also am going to have a paid pool where per bracket the entry fee is $15. You can do a max of 3 brackets in that pool. Payment will be to my PayPal, Venmo, CashApp, whichever of those that you prefer. 5th through 3rd place is going to get their money back. 2nd place will get double, and the winner is just going to get the rest, basically jackpot. So for the paid pool, you must pay me before the actual tournament starts. If you do your bracket and don't pay instantly, that's fine. It just has to be before the first actual game. Not play-in game, but actual game on Thursday starts, or I will not count your bracket in that pool. Both of those links will be in the description. And some keywords, just if you may not know, if you're not necessarily a constant viewer of college basketball, if I say things like Ken Pom, Bart Torvik, or just Torvik, Evan Mia, these are all predictive analytical sites that we use for a ton of research. And if you hear me mention them or say this team is 15th in Ken Pom or Bart Torvik, that's just saying where on the site the team is ranked overall, as in their net rating, which all of these are, obviously we mentioned, predictive and analytical sites. Now there's so much to go over, and keep an eye out for more videos because this won't be the only one. It's going to be one of 3 main videos before the Selection Sunday occurs. So go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss out on those important videos. But there's some overarching stuff that we need to note here in the beginning. One is just the landscape of college basketball right now. It's changing, obviously, but last year was a big transition, and we saw the replications of that in, obviously, because of transfer portal and NIL, but we saw it directly show in the NCAA tournament. The talent is basically being sucked up to the top even faster now, so it's even harder for other lower tier schools and teams to potentially keep good players. They just move up for bigger colleges for more money and opportunities, which makes sense. But the way it's structured really makes it even harder for lower schools to potentially succeed. Obviously, you're going to have good players on lower teams. That's obviously going to happen, and you'll have your Cinderella studs. But the consistency of that is becoming harder and harder, as we've seen. And with that, the top tier teams are even better. And it's why there was not a single 1 through 4 seed to lose in round 1 last year. We saw it literally happen, and it was because it was the strongest combined 1 through 4 seeds ever based on their net ranking, or not net ranking, but net rating. So rating meaning what their analytical stats say they are, their net rating. Of those 1 through 4 seeds, the only seed to not be the strongest ever was the 2 seed last year, and it was the 2nd strongest ever. And as for the 16 through 13 seeds, none of them were above 13th all time for their specific seed line. So that's why there was such a large disparity, and why there were no 1 through 4 seeds that ended up losing last year. Now, where you can find the value is the next seed line, the 5 through 12, or 5 seed versus 12 seed. That game right there, at least that start, was last year the best 12 seeds based on their efficiency margin ever, and it was the 3rd smallest difference, 3rd smallest gap between a 5 and a 12 seeds on average. And we had 2 12 seeds end up winning, and it was almost 3. We are insanely close to 3. UC San Diego versus Michigan, who I don't think they should have played anyways. I think Michigan was underranked because they went on ahead and won the Big Ten tournament, and they didn't put enough stake in that. But we almost had 3. But not only was it the 5 through 12 seed, you also had the 6, 7, 8, 9, and 11 seeds, all the strongest ever by efficiency. So it's also just the fact that the level of play is increasing at a very fast rate. And the meta and key strategies with analytics are becoming even more widespread in college basketball, that we are comparing. I mean, if you compare teams now, on average, let's say a team ranked 5th or 6th, even 20th now compared to just 4 years ago, is just not the same. There's a clear gap there. And I mean, last year, all of the 1 seeds, every single 1 seed last year was in the top 10 in efficiency margin all time. So of all time since they started tracking that stuff, all 4 1 seeds from one season, which was last year, were top 10 going into the tournament all time in just terms of how good of a team they were. And it's why we were able to predict in one of the 2 bracket videos I did all 4 1 seeds going, even though it happened one other time, because we saw that trend and how crazy it was and how good these teams are, even if they have the same rating on them or the same number. They're a 1 seed, just like these teams are 1 seeds. They're not all made the same. I promise you that. And of which, I think 2 is the max normally you would do. 1 seeds, they make the Final 4. But last year we saw the trend and we had 3 in one video and 4 in the other. And I know normally it's the casual people that pick that, but that's just unfortunately kind of what we're seeing in college basketball right now. Now, when it comes to this year, there's still the conference tournament to play for more data, obviously. But the trend for a majority of the 1 seeds might be even better than last year. The 1 seeds of Duke, Michigan, and Arizona would all be, no question, top 10 all time for this season in adjusted efficiency margin. And all of them at the moment would be better than Florida, Houston, and Auburn were going into March last year. So last year's Florida, Houston, and Auburn, 3 of the 1 seeds. And Arizona is the only team not rated higher than Duke was last year. So Duke this year and Michigan this year right now are rated higher than Duke was last year going into March. And Florida right now is in between where Houston and Auburn were last year, so they'd be sniffing top 10 all time as well. So when the conference tournament ends, if all of them win their conference tournament, we could be looking at 4 1 seeds again, back-to-back years, being in the top 10 all time of any team ever in adjusted efficiency margin. And Florida is pretty, much the obvious one right now to be a 1 seed because of UConn's recent loss that they just had. So if we're going to establish something off the bat, yes, this 1 seed group is going to show very similar to the predictive metrics, if not even better than last year. But that doesn't guarantee that they're all going to make the Final 4. And we still have to identify who can actually win it all, because there's a lot of stats that teams have to fit historically for us to confidently pick a champion. And obviously, to separate in your bracket, you got to pick who's going to win it all and who's going to make the title game, not just the Final 4. But we're going to get to that at the end of the video because there's so much stuff to go over. But let's get into other seeds rather than 1 seeds right now. For the projections this year, when it comes to overall strength, like how I mentioned with the 5 seeds last year, the 4 seed line this year could maybe be more chaotic with how it looks right now compared to last year. Now, it's important, obviously, to wait to form your opinions because these teams could drop to maybe a 5 seed instead of being a projected 4 seed right now. And as we mentioned previously, that 5 to 12 gap seems like there's a potential jump there where there could be upsets brewing, at least compared to what there was with 4 versus 13. But teams like Alabama, Kansas, Nebraska, Texas Tech, maybe Virginia, maybe Gonzaga, all of these teams, even if it's just by a little bit, could be considered lower than average for a 4 seed for this specific year. But here's the problem. Just compare the KenPom rating, I'll show you, of 2025 to 2026. There is a clear step up on average, and it really doesn't even get even until around the 20s where you see the drop there, which is again around where that potential 5 to 6 seed line is. And if you compare it to 2024, you just can see the clear step up each year when you're following any individual rank, like an 8 from the 8th ranked team from 2024 to the 8th ranked team for 2026, and you can just see the gap there. But again, to reiterate, anything brought up about these teams, even if they have stats to back it up, who's in front of them, their play style, and the location are big factors in how far they're actually going to go. So it's important to come back to the prediction video when the bracket's actually out so that we know who these teams are facing. But speaking of teams that are maybe not as good as their seed line, let's start with the over and underseeded teams. Now, this is a concept of utilizing what seed a team is and comparing it to the expected efficiency of a team on that seed line to determine whether they are considered seeded too high based on what their predictive metrics are or too low. Now, this is a graph from Evan Mia, another analytical site, and it's a bit outdated right now, so it's good for visualizing, but the actual data itself should not be taken 100% serious because it is obviously outdated. You can see where some of the teams are ranked, but it's good to use because we could just go back and see, okay, this is where a team's relative rating is right now. But that line is basically going to stay the same. Teams underneath that black line are going to be considered overseeded based on what seed they fall into, and teams over that dotted line above are going to be considered underseeded, meaning their relative rating is higher than what you would expect for that seed. And why we are potentially looking at this is I went back and looked at the data for basically since this guy's been tracking it for over 10 years, and I wanted to find out the claim he makes of underseeded teams advance 69% farther in the bracket than teams on the same seed line. I want to see if that was true. And while the underseeded claim is true for the most part, I think it's even more drastic for overseeded teams, because it may be hard to find maybe what crazy 8 seed or 11 seed is going to make a big run. But what helps is maybe seeing what higher seeds could be subject to losing earlier than we think and not going as far, helping us with our bracket by using process of elimination, because we can maybe say, hey, this 4, this 3, this 2, this 5 seed, they're probably not going to go, or probably not going to be as good as we think. Now, for the underseeded history, for the list, showing, this list of underseeded teams in total, the average is 4 to 5 wins above seed expectation when you combine every underseeded team, and at least 2 lower seeds here that are considered underseeded do outperform where their seed metric is. However, I've seen a constant trend that at least 1 seed that is maybe 5 or 6 through 1 that is actually considered underseeded, meaning they're, even if they're a 3 seed or a 2 seed, they're considered underseeded. At least one of those seeds underperforms from what we think. So if we catch an underseeded team and we think that they are going to be, much better than they are, at least one of them does actually not perform like we think. So just because they're an underseeded team and there might be value does not guarantee success every single time. For proof of this, let's look back at 2024. 2024, here's the graph, the final one for 2024. From the underseeded teams, about 75% of them were good. You had James Madison and Michigan State winning in round 1, James Madison being a 12 seed, so that was obviously unexpected. But you also had Gonzaga going to the Sweet 16, Duke going to the Final Four, and UConn being your national champion. All of these were considered underseeded teams, as you can see on that graph. Now, where we have to use context with it is for teams like Auburn. Auburn was a massively underseeded team based on their metrics. They get a 4 seed. Look how high up they are there. And it was one of the weirdest situations we've ever seen with how they were rated and what seed they were. But if we use context, we can see that in 2024, the only teams above an 8 seed that they actually beat was Alabama. They lost to App State earlier that year. So while looking at this, it may seem like they're a steal. It's not all that it meets the eye, because not all underseeded teams always succeed. And if you don't remember, this Auburn team lost in the first round. Pretty interesting stuff there. Then you have the overseeded teams. There were a lot more overseeded teams here. And this year, about 66.6% of them failed. You had UNC making the Sweet 16 for a 1 seed. You would obviously hope the Elite 8, but that is kind of potential lower average. So maybe not a super success there, but not a huge failure. Marquette, 2 seed, Sweet 16, kind of similar thing. Kentucky, a 3 seed, went out in round 1. Baylor, 3 seed, went out in round 2. KU, 4 seed, went out in round 2. Should have been round 1 too with their game. Wisconsin, 5 seed, went out in round 1. St. Mary's, 5 seed, went out in round 1. South Carolina, 6 seed, went out in round 1. All those teams, only 2 of them lost to underseeded teams. So just because it's, an overseeded team and they're facing, let's say, another overseeded team, doesn't guarantee that, this team's going to win. Because look at Oakland. Oakland was not even considered a normal 14 seed, and they still beat Kentucky, who was barely considered underseeded. But all these teams right here that are just not exactly what each seed you would expect, so many of them lost in the first and second round. So that's why it's super important. But you got to look. You have other ones that didn't fail. Clemson was a 6 seed. They were not considered for sure above where their seed line should be, and they made the Elite 8. And it was one of the more shocking deep runs that we've had, as they played all of the higher seeds in their run. They didn't play any or got lucky with any super low seed. And in round 1 of the ACC tournament that year, they literally lost to Boston College, and it dropped them down to the 6th seed. So it just goes to show March will always have unpredictable runs that you just can't predict with all the stuff that we're looking at here. But there were also 4 teams in the 7 to 9 seed range that did win at least 1 game. Then you have 2021. Underseeded teams, 80% of them succeeded. Syracuse is an 11 seed, made the Sweet 16. UCLA was technically not directly considered here, but they made the Final Four. They were close. They were right under there on the line. 14 seed, Abilene Christian. They end up winning a first-round game, and they were pretty massively underseeded there as well. Loyola Chicago, as an 8 seed, also beat a 1 seed to make the Sweet 16. But you do have UNC, who was considered pretty underseeded there right with them, as you can see on that 8 seed line, and they lost in round 1. But you also had Houston making the Final Four and Gonzaga making the title game. Both of them were considered definitely above the class of the rest of the teams in their tier. And then again, look at the overseeded teams. 90% of them failed. 2 seed Ohio State, round 1. 3 seed Kansas, round 2. 3 seed Texas, round 1. 3 seed West Virginia, round 2. 4 seed Purdue, round 1. 4 seed Oklahoma State, round 2. 6 seed San Diego State, round 1. BYU, 6 seed, round 1. Clemson, 7 seed, round 1. All of these teams lost in the first or second round. Now, you did have some successes, again, like 3 seed Arkansas, but it was close, and they had a 2-point win versus, a 6 seed in Texas Tech, and then they ended up getting to face Oral Roberts in the next round. Now, these are all kind of more on the extreme end for years that we've seen, but the average for how many overseeded teams fail and how many underseeded teams succeed based on their success is around 60% for both. So it's not 100% you should just follow the graph, but if you're kind of close for a matchup, I would look at this and say, okay, this team maybe is not exactly what we'd expect to be for on average of how good a 3 seed is, how good a 4 seed is, etc. Maybe I should pick against them in this matchup. So I think those are important things to think about. Now, how does it play out for this year? Again, these are not 100% set, and we will have a set graph when he makes one when the bracket comes out, but some ones that I looked at right now. Louisville, they just lost another game. They are projected around a 6 seed. Their analytical stuff is really staying around the same, around the teens, mid-teens area in the predictive sites. But these guys feel a bit more obvious in that if they face a team ranked higher than them, they just probably won't win. They're 1-8 in Q1A, Q1, Q2, Q3 of net ranking. You can also separate it in Q1A, which is kind of like A-tier opponents, and they're 1-8 in those. But they did have a stretch without Michael Brown Jr., their star guard, so the resume with him fully present would be, I think, better because they did have a stretch where they lost to some California teams in there. But they seem like an obvious, if the matchup isn't bad, like round of 32 ceiling, unless a 3 seed gets upset or something like that. Other teams in here, Ohio State. Now, unfortunately for them, finally winning is making them only go up. But as a potential 10-9 seed, they have offensive explosiveness like to an insane potential where you just can't overlook them at all. They have one of the best offensive scorers in basketball this year in Bruce Thornton. Honestly, for a while, it was unfortunate they weren't able to make the tournament last year, but he's definitely going to this year. And they've had a few key guys miss some games here and there, but now they're all good and playing together. But the defense can basically keep any team in the game with them. So they're going to have to obviously get hot, but they can totally do it. UCLA, similarly, around a 10 seed, maybe they go up to an 8 or 9. Guard Donovan Dent was a highly touted transfer, has not really been what we thought, but he's slowly getting it together. They've got recent wins versus Illinois and Nebraska. Their issue is, though, they are extremely reliant on home. So if they aren't playing on the West Coast in March, I would be a little bit worried. And so that's why we need to see kind of where exactly they are playing to see if maybe we want to pick them as an upset team. Iowa, yes, another Big Ten team. Now, they are recently on the downward end, being towards a 9 seed, maybe even 10, but the numbers do still like them. This is basically Drake from last year. A lot of players that are from that team. The coach and the star player, Bennett Sturtz, are from that team, which he's such a great player, definitely has an NBA future there. But they have losses to Maryland and Penn State recently. Literally the bottom of the Big Ten, not good. Although Penn State has actually put up a lot of close games and they have a bright future against a lot of other good teams. But they also have wins versus Nebraska, Ohio State, and only a 3-point loss versus Michigan recently. So they're kind of hard to pin down, but they are considered underseeded right now if they are going to be around that 9 to 10 seed range. Texas, they've climbed up to being right on the bubble to kind of being in March. They're like the Ohio State of the SEC, but on crack. Like, they are an insane offensive anomaly, top 10 offense, but below 100 defense. But contrary to what you would think, it's not the crazy 3-point shooting as to why they have this crazy offense. They get to the line a ton. They are second in the country in free throw attempts per field goal attempt. And they are super experienced. Head coach is Sean Miller, obviously was with Arizona, and DeAndre Ayton had an issue there and then went to Xavier, made the tournament with them last year. They are barely on here, though, because they could be anywhere from like an 11 to a 9 seed. So if they're on the lower end there, they might be kind of interesting. And then South Florida, which is not an at-large team at all, but you kind of seen them in this graph here. They've only gone up a little bit here. They still have to win their conference. They're not an at-large team, but they could be some value as an 11 seed if they get in winning their conference tournament. And then really quick, some overseeded teams that we're just kind of looking at right now. Again, this is not putting any of these teams 100% down. We mentioned we did see some of these overseeded teams actually succeed and go beyond what we thought based on what their predictive metrics were. But this is kind of some that we have to acknowledge right now. Michigan State, if they move up to like and stay at a 2 seed or so, which this is being recorded before the Michigan game, by the way. But if they're a 2 seed, because of the strength at the top, they would be considered an overseeded 2 seed. However, they were also considered that last year too, and they made the Elite Eight. So again, doesn't necessarily put them out for good. Alabama and Kansas, they are slightly, because they're on like that 3 to 4 seed line. If they're a 4 seed, they really wouldn't be overseeded. But if they're a 3 seed, they would be definitely considered overseeded. KU with their, obviously, we know about KU and everything about them. Just chaos. They have massive wins versus Houston and Arizona, but also some really bad losses. Cincinnati at home, by the way, and recently Arizona State. Darren Peterson's situation with his minutes and playing time has been well documented, although it's kind of slowed down recently. And, he's playing a bit more, but they had a lot of times where they were better without him. So that's still something that they're honestly figuring out. So there's some question marks there. And then Alabama, the resume metrics love them. They have them as potential 2 seed. Really high strength of schedule. It's a classic Alabama team where they have a good offense but a poor defense for a higher seed. And, they're weird because of the Charles Bediako drama where he, honestly didn't really change their predictive metrics at all. I looked at, games with him and games without him. They're still around like that 17 range. So some of the maybe wins and losses did affect their resume, but predictive-wise, didn't really change a lot of stuff there. But those are two teams where if they're on the 3 seed, I'd be a little, anxious. I don't know. I would, obviously be able to pick them, but I could see them not making this second weekend, but I could also see them potentially going off and making the Elite Eight or something like that. So Bama and KU, I think, are ones that we got to watch. Villanova, they're being maybe around a 7 to 8 seed. They are a pretty clear, team that's either going to win round 1 and just lose in the round of 32 unless they face a, 15 or 16 seed. Or that maybe they lose in round 1. I don't know, but they're kind of a ceiling of round of 32. And then UCF, they are dropping for sure on their seed because of the recent losses, but they have some big wins. Texas Tech when they were healthy, Kansas, TCU, BYU, Texas A&M. It's just the metrics are much lower on them. They're ranked around the 50s, I think maybe 60s now, high 60s. So they're around a 10 seed for now. There's potential they fall to an 11. I think they're probably 10, but one kind of big important thing with them that I want to mention here is there's a metric called kill shots. You may have known about this last year when I went over it. It's basically an Evan Mia stat that measures how many 10-0 runs a team goes on / gives up in any given game. And obviously, the better you control that, the higher chances you have to win any game. Because as we know, basketball is basically a game of runs. That's pretty much what we know it to be in simple terms. UCF would be one of the first teams, I think, ever to make as an at-large bid, so not just winning their conference tournament, because anyone can win their conference tournament, technically, but as an at-large team that would get in, they would be one of the first teams that's actually negative in this stat, meaning on average, they give up more 10-0 runs than they create. Almost no teams that even make the tournament as an at-large bid are negative in that stretch, and they are. So that is something I would be extremely worried about. And then last one I want to get to here, but we're not going to fully dive into them because we're going to get to them later, is Miami, Ohio. We'll get to them later, but if they went out and they're a higher seed than 11 here, they would be considered one of the most overseeded teams we've seen. But there's a lot of context with them, and I promise you we're going to get to them because I'm really excited to talk about that team because they are the talk of this year. So definitely something we'll touch on. But again, Not a final graphic. I'll show the final one from him in my March prediction video, or if it comes out before that, I'll show it, or you can obviously just look it up yourself. But you could, use that graphic line that you see there and just kind of go through yourself, see what he has their relative rating as, and if it's moved, and you can do it yourself, see what seed line they are, move them up to where you or not where you think, but where they actually are in relative rating, and you'll see, okay, they are considered underseeded here, they're considered overseeded here. You can all do that stuff yourself, and that's what I did to see based off these teams, because that graphic was obviously outdated. But there's more on here that I didn't mention. Some obvious teams that maybe you saw that I didn't talk about: Gonzaga, Texas Tech, BYU, UNC. But I note these because these have some serious injury effects with them that you absolutely need to know. Because some of them have some guys that are, basically all of them, I think, have guys that are going to be out for the entire season. And they definitely change how this team potentially looks this year, going into March. Now, this is unfortunately a weird year where we had a lot of superstar important players on really good teams are now out for the entire season. There are a few that we are waiting for. I don't think they will, like Nate Ament from Tennessee. I won't necessarily touch on him in here. I will when they kind of finish their season and we can look at what games he missed. But there are guys that are going to be out for the year that were extremely important for a lot of the teams that I listed. First, and the earliest one, was Gonzaga. Their forward, Braden Huff, basically their second best player. He's been out since early January. His projected return is, literally right for March, but it's still a guarantee. It's really up in the air if he's even going to play in the NCAA tournament. And if he will, he, might not be 100% healthy from his recovery. And with him, so, pre-injury, they were 8th in Bartorvik. Again, Bartorvik, just another analytical site. And they were 5th in wins above bubble, which is a good resume metric to go off of, but essentially saying how much better this team was compared to the average bubble team. So they were 5th. Without him, they are 21st in Bartorvik, and they are 27th in wins above bubble. So there is a clear gap there from what they've been without him. Obviously, that included the Portland loss, the St. Mary's loss recently, but he's in 2 of their 3 best rated lineups as well, including 4 of the highest offensive rating lineups that they possibly have. He's in all of them. So, they may not seem from baseline analytics as an underseeded team, but, or even if they are, they actually might be considered an underseeded team if they are, let's say, a 4 seed, because the analytics do really like them as a top 10 team. Without Huff, I think this team is just not on the same level, and that should be taken into account, and it definitely will be when I'm predicting my brackets, that's for sure. But no matter what, if it's a 3 or 4 seed, I think taking into account his injury, they are probably going to be considered an overseeded team. Texas Tech, they obviously had forward JT Toppin, best player on the team. He has been out only since February 20th, but is gone for the year, unfortunately. Before the injury, they were consensus around 17th on all sites and basically 14th in all resume-based metrics. Now, there's not enough, data to fully go off of, but they are pretty similar, honestly. They were ranked around, I believe, 16th last time I checked in total, but it's very stark difference in terms of how they get to 16th, because their offense is 3rd since he's been gone, but the defense is 130th. So, pretty stark difference there, and I don't know how sustainable that is, and I would like to see them in the conference tournament, obviously, to see what else they do, but we might have to be picking Texas Tech off some pretty limited data there without JT Toppin, and it's the same thing for another Big 12 team, and it was basically at the same time. Unfortunately for BYU, Richie Saunders, the second best player on the team, was ruled out only 3 days earlier to JT Toppin on February 17th, and with him, they were around 27th in Bartorvik and around 19th in wins above bubble with him. Again, it's a smaller sample size since he's been out, but they are around the 70s in Bartorvik without him. They have a top 30 offense, but the defense is in the 200s in the recent games we've played. Again, obviously it's a low sample size, so it's not like they're going to be for sure 200s in defense the whole time. But AJ Devansa and Rob Wright are absolutely caring and doing everything they can. And they had issues with him anyways, with beating certain teams, but he was so valuable. I am just very, very worried about BYU. They did just recently win a big game, but it was versus Texas Tech at home. So both BYU and Texas Tech, not saying they're both going to go out round one, but we got to see where they're seated, who they're playing, and have to take into account the team without those two players. And then the big one that is honestly the most unfortunate, UNC. Caleb Wilson had obviously a hand injury or a fracture, I believe. I don't remember exactly what it was, to one of his hands. And it was in the Miami game they played. And he's, missed time before then, but he was on track to come back for the ACC tournament. And then it was said that he was potentially going to be back for, the game versus Duke at Duke, because they, beat Duke earlier this year at home. And it was, I believe, the day before that, maybe, or if not, maybe the same day, notified that he, in a practice, went to go, he was getting ready, and in a practice, he went to go dunk and messed up his thumb on his other hand, and I believe broke it or something, and had to have surgery, and is out for the entire year. So, just insane, unfortunate stuff. We don't get to see this guy, one, play, obviously, in that rivalry game again, but two, the ACC tournament, March Madness, we don't get to see this guy play. Basically, Kevin Garnett, reincarnated, essentially, in my opinion, and it just sucks, and it's really bad. And for UNC, obviously, it's not great. They were 25th in Bart Torvik and 20th in wins above bubble with him, so they were not as good as you thought necessarily as a team with him, but still obviously a good team. Without him, though, they're 37th currently. Again, all of this could change with the conference tournament, but they also are a for sure step down. And UNC, BYU, Texas Tech, this could be the, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 in BYU's case. That's where these teams could be seated, all, on the higher end. So not, 9 or lower. They're all 8 or higher seeds. So that means there could be some, there could realistically be some upset stuff here that maybe the normal numbers don't say, but with injury stuff that you have to take into account, all three of those things, all four, including Gonzaga, I would definitely note down and be watching when you're picking these teams here. But let's get into some of the teams that could be the ones to make those big upsets and give us the memorable Cinderella runs. I'm going to try and cover as many teams as possible because of the bid stealers that, could happen, like what happened with Belmont. They lost their first game of the Missouri Valley Conference Tournament. It was the first time a 1 seed lost to a 9 seed in that specific conference tournament, and Belmont was a for sure top-tier Cinderella candidate, and I had to basically scrap my notes for them. But, there's more in here at the moment. As we mentioned earlier with comparing the past 3 years in each team's ratings, these teams mentioned are on the same level as teams like McNeese, Drake, Colorado State of last year, but also UC San Diego, Yale were also really close to upset teams. They are considered similar to these teams. So not like we're going to have super chalk. We did have chalk again at the end, but in the beginning, there were some upsets that we mentioned. There's probably going to be some again here too, and it might be with some of these teams or maybe some that I mentioned in other videos. The first ones are going to be basically the top 2 in the American Conference, and it's only going to be one of them because we're not going to get an at-large bid from one of these teams. So whoever wins the American Conference out of these two teams, unless neither win, then we'll see who it is on a Selection Sunday. But that's going to be South Florida and Tulsa. These are the two main teams in the American that look like good, projected 12, 11 seed candidates. The main one is South Florida. Again, they are projected 12 to 11 seed. We mentioned them in the underseeded section. If we get bid stealers in other mid leagues, they might go up to an 11 seed, for sure. But they have a top 60 offense and defense, which you hardly ever see for potential double-digit seeds that are not in Power 5 schools. They've really only gone up in the net rankings the entire year. I don't think they've dropped at any point. They've just consistently gone up and up. They're at the mid-50s as I record this, but by the end of the conference tournament, they could reach around the high 40s, which is where some of the higher teams last year, like the Drakes, UC San Diego was the best, team, and they obviously had to play Michigan, but McNeese, Drake, Colorado State specifically of last year, that's around where they were, if not a little bit better. But they play at one of the fastest tempos in the country, and they absolutely crash the glass offensively to try and get as many possessions offensively as possible. Great strategy, but it's good for them because they specifically are not a team that necessarily shoots crazy well, but they don't need that to win. So I wouldn't necessarily just look at what their shooting percentages are and say I'm not going to pick them. They control the possessions, which matters a ton. So they are definitely viable, completely. But their key offensively is getting to the line. They are top 25 in free throw attempts, but they defensively, the trend for them is just to force the other team to play to the same style because the average amount of seconds per possession defensively is also pretty low, and they allow almost as many free throw attempts defensively as they try to gain offensively. So if you can just match them, basically, and just end up being better at what they do, which we saw last year with some teams, they might kind of, not really love that too much. But the thing with the Bulls is that their schedule, unlike some other teams here, is filled with teams of similar or great caliber. The issue is they didn't win a ton of them. They did play teams like Oklahoma State, VCU, Colorado State, Alabama. They did lose all of them, though. So the stats are probably more real than a lot of these other teams because they did face higher competition. But, I feel like they're going to need to get a good matchup here and, not just some like chuck it up team similar to like Alabama or Louisville. I wouldn't love that matchup for them. If they got anything other than that, I would potentially, be interested in viewing the Bulls as a team that I would pick as an upset. And something to note, they have a lot of recent close losses and their luck rating is pretty low, which if you don't know what that is, it's basically a KenPom metric used to try and show how much luck a team has experienced in a positive or negative way. And South Florida is relatively low in luck rating, which you don't normally see lower seeded teams who win their conference be lower in luck rating, because obviously you get lucky sometimes and it helps you win your conference and make the tournament. If South Florida wins their conference with that lower luck rating, that's also a pretty good sign of this is just how talented they are as a team, that they overcome some of these unlucky scenarios in close games. But it's the highest this team has been ranked since 2012, where they were a 12 seed play-in team, actually. And they won that play-in game along with beating Temple in round 1 as a 12 seed. And that was the last time they even made March. So pretty interesting stuff to keep an eye on for them. The other team here worth noting in the conference is Tulsa. They are right behind them in KenPom, and they are the one that's kind of easier to pin down, but it's because they're a very offensive-centric team. Top 25 offense. They shoot almost 40% from 3, and they let it fly a lot. Everything on paper says they'd be like the kryptonite for South Florida, but South Florida has a head-to-head advantage twice against them. But if they face in the title game, they'd have to play each other 3 times. Obviously, it's hard to be a team 3 times in a row in a season that's close to you. So I would think that they wouldn't want to face them there. But that's why they are considerably, up there, because South Florida has been able to basically dominate their conference. But I would still keep an eye on Tulsa if they make that conference title game, which I believe theirs is like on Saturday or Sunday. So we won't know until much later. But watch the American Conference tournament and see those 2 teams, and whoever wins, if it is one of those 2, I think could be a pretty good upset Cinderella candidate. The next one's a very similar situation, the Southland Conference. That's Stephen F. Austin versus McNeese. Stephen F. Austin is the current leader and the 1 seed in that conference. They're around the 80s in all predictive sites, and they really force teams to not win from 3. They will die guarding the perimeter, and it works for them. They're top 25 in 3-point defense, but it might be a little forced because they are a pretty small team. The tallest player is like 6'9", and they're 1, 2, and 3. So their point guard, shooting guard, small forward are all 6'3" and under, and they all start. But their center, Jared Colonel, he averages 2.5 blocks per game, which is the best in the conference. So basically, everyone is pretty small. They guard the perimeter, and they kind of just rely on their one main big guy who is successful to help guard down below. So if they face some kind of big team that really just camps in the paint, I'd be a little worried to find them. But Offensively, they do take care of the ball, and they get the most efficient open three, and they shoot pretty well from three. They shoot around 36% from three. However, because of their height and the bigs are not necessarily creators down low, they do not shoot well at the basket, but also not from the free throw line either. And defensively, if they face, again, a really large team who can snag offensive boards, like a Tennessee, for example, which is a realistic matchup, I would like Tennessee there. And while they don't, really have any major non-conference games, they only have 4 losses, and all 5 of them are within 5 points, and 3 of those 4 losses are being 1-possession games. So they are pretty close to being like a maybe 2 or 1 loss team that we are talking about a lot more. But they're not the clear leader, because the team who's second in the conference but is actually higher in all predictive sites, which is a familiar face, is McNeese. We saw them the past 2 years with Will Wade, who obviously went to North Carolina. Now they have a new coach in here, and they are actually, again, higher than Stephen F. Austin on predictive sites, around the mid-60s or so, similar to what they were last year. By the end of their conference tournament, if they win, they will probably be just as good as the McNeese team was last year, who won a first-round matchup, just a very different play style, way more defensive-oriented. They are number 1 in the country in forced turnover percentage, almost 1/4. One out of every 4 defensive possessions that they have result in a forced turnover for them. That is pretty insane. They force their opponents into just daring them to jack up threes or only being able to get to the line, and they will make them take up the entire shot clock. They literally have the longest average defensive possession length in the entire country. An average of 19 seconds is how long the opponent's offense take on average on any possession to get a shot up. That is insane. So in a way, their defense, I think, should be really fun to watch if you kind of like that stuff. The concern is they go for turnovers a ton, and they are susceptible to offensive rebounds from the other team. They, allow one of the highest offensive rebound percentages in the entire country. So teams that can really just kind of get the crash the glass, they would really succeed versus team. But they do have a better non-conference strength of schedule. They played Santa Clara and Michigan. They did lose both, but they also beat George Washington, which is a capable team in their conference, or in the other conferences as well. So they're a very specific type of team. They'll have to play, for me, a specific type of team to feel good about picking them. But like a Louisville, who doesn't like to drive, has some turnover issues, chucks up threes, that might be a more ideal matchup for Tennessee. And the third conference that we're going to get into also has 2 teams that we have to go over, except this is the most anticipated one. And here we get to the MAC. Some MACtion going on, and it's chaos because this is where we have Miami, Ohio. Now, I need to emphasize how much of an anomaly Miami of Ohio is in so many ways. And you may already know, but I don't think it's emphasized enough. Obviously, you have the undefeated regular season part of that, which is crazy. They have the most 1-possession wins while staying undefeated through the whole year since 1949. 1949 is the last time any team ever won this many 1-possession games and was able to stay undefeated. Their percentages if you just take game by game, the percentages of like how down they were, potentially what the score was, everything taken into account, the percentage they would win all those games is like 0.000037. It is insane what this team has done. It has never happened before, and they are the first team, obviously, to go undefeated since 2021 Gonzaga. But with all of the undefeated, teams that we've had, all of them were 1 seeds. Miami, Ohio is not going to be a 1 seed, but no matter what happens in the MAC tournament, it should be clear, they will be in March. So I'm not even waiting to go over stuff because this team is 100% going to be in March. There's a 0% chance a team that did not lose a single regular season game in front of them does not make March. Not going to happen. They will be in. Now, the obvious talk with them is about their strength of schedule, saying they haven't beat anyone. That's unfortunately kind of been the most talk with them. It sucks that a team like this just has the most backward, just talking down to them and discrediting what they've done, which I understand. and they aren't even the highest rated team in predictive metrics in their own conference, which we're going to get to that other team. That's why there's two here from the MAC we have to talk about, because they're not the highest ranked team predictive wise for all the metrics in their conference. But it's a slippery slope with this team because not having any major non-conference games was not their choice. No one wanted to play them. Literally, we've gotten to a point where these good mid-major teams are like kryptonite for any Power 5 school because of how the net ranking system works. It does not benefit them, these big teams, to risk losing to a team like Miami of Ohio, because if they win, it doesn't provide them as much help to their resume compared to if they lose, how much damage it could do. So what's the point in playing them? So Power Conference teams either just play other Power Conference teams that are good or bad in their conference, or just the bottom of the barrel teams that are not going to make March or might be like 16 or 15 seeds or something like that. That's basically what we get. These teams in the middle, it's pretty hard to go on ahead and get actual good matchups versus, potential solid Power 5 teams that are looking to make at-large bids. So, it's tough because, yes, their only big win is the only other team in their conference, but it's not because of their own doing. So maybe it says something that no one wanted to play this team and they ended up being undefeated. I don't know. Might say something there. But looking at them as a team, the offense is very dangerous. They are super efficient shooting. They are top 5 in the country in effective field goal percentage and 2-point field goal percentage. They're balanced in their shot chart as well. So they don't really specifically rely on one type of offensive game plan. They can go ahead and do basically anything. They have a top 5 offensive rating in the country. They're second in points per game, averaging almost 91 points per game. That's second in the country. And they have 6 different double-digit scorers that play. Now, they also have the most continuity in the country, meaning they really know how to play with each other, and they've been playing with each other for a while. Now, their weaknesses offensively is on the glass. They do not really save themselves with extra possessions. They just rely on the ball going in the basket first, which clearly has worked for them. The defense is not ideal or anything, but it's been good enough because they've been able to win every game. So it's not insane or ideal, but the defense is good enough for how good the offense is. But teams that like to drive and post up, they are around the 20th to 30th percentile in defending that. So obviously teams like Florida or Arizona come to mind of, hey, this would be a horrible matchup for them. But if you're Miami of Ohio, you're not worried about Florida and Miami. Like, that's not, your goal is not to do that. Your goal is, we're going to win a game in March. We're going to go as far as we possibly can. And if those are the teams that are your kryptonite, hey, guess what? They're the kryptonite for every other team. So I think that might be a pretty good thing for them. Now, I did note that I will note now, that they are around the high 80s to low 90s in predictive metrics as I record this. However, we can bump them up a little bit because there's some context that needs to be said that isn't really the case for a lot of other teams. They did have a big switch up in their lineup when one of their guards, Evan Isparo, got injured and has not played since December. Since the lineup switch, they have actually, and again, this is specifically from when he is not, because he's out for the year and he hasn't played since. From when he's been out in December until now, they're actually around the low 70s instead of this, high 80s, which is a pretty massive jump. And if you look into it even more, they've had some starters miss like 1 to 2 games here and there, and they are very important starters, which in the game, obviously they didn't lose, but their performance decreased, which lowered their predictive metrics. So if we take into account that the whole starting 5 is going to be playing, and obviously you also take into account what the starting 5 is now, not what it was at the beginning of the year or in 2025 because of that injury and the lineup switch that happened, they should be around the low 60s with all of that context, which is, looking at some of the best non-Power 5 teams like South Florida and Tulsa we talked about, that's right where they are. So it might seem obvious when I say it, but, that's not the case if you just look at the predictive sites that this Miami of Ohio team is better than you think. They might be 90 or 88 in Ken Pom and Bart Torvik or Evan Mia, but they've had a lineup change, and they've had a few guys miss some games that really lowered their predictive metrics, and if they would have played, they wouldn't have lowered. They are even better than the predictive metrics say, because we have to take into account the injury and lineup switches. So, as I mentioned, we were looking at Miami, according to bracketologists, as like an 11 seed. In my opinion, I think they should be around a 10 seed, especially if they win their conference tournament, because even if their resume metrics say they should be an 8 or 9, I don't think it's fair to put them in 8 or 9. I just don't like that at all, having to play a 1 seed next round. I think if they are an 11 seed, hey, maybe it just works out for them. Maybe they get an 11 seed, they'll play a 3 seed or a 6 seed, whatever. Hey, maybe it works out. If they're a 10 seed, they have to play a 2 seed next round if they win. Either way, 10 or 11 seems to be what they are going to be. But if they lose their conference tournament, again, they're in for sure, but they'll be an 11 seed. But, among the group that's on, one side being kind of all in, hey, it's a great story, we got to love them and pick them. And then there's the other side that is going all against them, talking about the strength of schedule and they've played no one and blah, blah, blah. I think that also the people on that side bring up the predictive metrics. I think I'm kind of slightly halfway, but I'm joining more so on the side that is on the Redhawks side here, because we have to take into account those things that we brought up with the lineup changes, the injuries. Instead of being around the 80s, they should be around like the mid 60s for their rankings, which brings them up a ton. But the thing is, we mentioned 2 teams here, a team that is basically right around the 60s actually in their rankings, that if they win this conference, obviously would get an automatic bid. And I think Miami of Ohio is making March no matter what happens in their conference tournament. That could make this a 2-bid league, which for here is Akron. They represented the MAC last year, and they are higher rated than Miami of Ohio on all predictive sites. But since you watched me, you understand the context of that, and you know that they are actually right next to each other. But they are similar to Miami of Ohio in that they are offensive centric, except they shoot way more threes. They are 33rd in the country in 3-point rate, along with being top 12 in 2 and 3-point percentage. So more elite shooting wise than Miami of Ohio. But it's, that's mainly what they do, because they are among the lowest in the country in free throw rate. So they do really rely on that specifically. But they actually did get some non-conference games. Games like Purdue, Yale, Murray State, Troy. All of these are solid teams to play if you're a team like Akron. Unfortunately, they did lose all of them, though, so that could be an issue. But the Yale loss was only by 2 points, and Yale went 21 for 21 from the free throw line. So, honestly, that's just kind of unlucky there. But their only in-conference loss is to Miami of Ohio, but it was on the road by 3 points. Their issue, though, is they tend to get into shootouts, and they are super reliant on having to shoot much better than the other team. So if they don't, adjust, they don't adjust in general. They just continue to shoot, which could be chaotic because we've seen it, a lot of teams like versus Murray State or Troy that they played, where these could be March teams and they were on a similar level and they ended up losing. But I honestly think we should be rooting for Akron to win the MAC so that we can get both of these teams in March, because I want to see Akron and Miami of Ohio as 11, maybe Akron would be a 12 seed. I want to see both of them in March. So I'm not rooting against Miami of Ohio, but I think for the sake of tournament stuff, they are for sure in. Let's go ahead and get Akron in here too, winning the conference tournament, and we'd have 2 MAC teams in. That's kind of what I'm rooting for, and I would look at both of them to maybe pull off an upset. And then let's end it off 2 more for this Cinderella run that we can mention that were actually in the dance last year that are also projected to be here this year. And the first one is High Point. They just recently won, so they are for sure going to be in, so I don't need to worry about them maybe losing. But they're honestly, similar to last year's team, even though it's a brand new team here with personnel, except they're way more balanced than last year's. The allure of last year's High Point team, which a lot of people liked, was their top 25 offense, but the defense was in the mid 200s, and they were super reliant on who they would have played, playstyle wise. And last year, we saw that they were playing Purdue. And while I did talk about them in this type of video last year, I did bring up about the, personnel, or not personnel, but the matchup does matter for them. And a lot of people just liked them and picked them blindly. When they went against Purdue, I noticed, hey, this is not a good matchup for them because Purdue does everything they do, but better. And even though we liked High Point as maybe a good Cinderella team, they didn't get a good matchup. And so we picked against them and they lost in that game. So just because they're here, or any team is here, doesn't guarantee that we're picking them to make a Cinderella run. But for this specific team, where they win is the turnover battle. They are top 5 in both forced turnovers and turnovers given up. So they're first in the country in steals. They average 11 steals per game. They do not focus on threes like last year's team at all. They are way more of getting inside, getting to the line. And the defense is not as awful as last year, but it hasn't really been tested specifically from three. So a team like Iowa State or Purdue, ironically, which I believe won't be able to play Purdue because the the committee does not put or not like putting, or maybe they can't, back-to-back teams playing the same, like round one playing literally like against each other again. So they're not going to play Purdue, but like an Iowa State who shoot well, take care of the ball, that would not be an ideal matchup for High Point at all. And then we also have Yale, very similar to last year's Yale team, efficient from three, but not reliant from three. Just an overall good offense. They're not rushed. They get the best possible shot each possession, so they do have longer offensive possessions, but also a ton of continuity. They are top 5 in returning minutes, and they have a win versus Akron, which, like we mentioned previously, is a potential team that could be on here as well. But they also have 3 conference losses, which normally in the past 3 years, they were in March. They didn't have that many conference losses, so it's a little more than you would like. But they do a good job not allowing teams to, get to the line. I mean, they really stop you from driving, but it leaves them susceptible for 3. So a good 3-point shooting team could snag them. But again, they're efficient from 3 as well. So as long as they don't have to fully get off their game offensively and just survive defensively, we've seen them been able to win as a lower seed in March before. And like we mentioned, the potential 5 to 6 seed line is similar, which last year there was a very clear gap from 4 to 5 seed, where 1 through 4 we mentioned didn't lose at all, but 5 and down had some upsets there. And the 11 to 12 seeds were ranked as the best ever. These ones are pretty similar, so we're probably going to see a similar amount of upsets, to be honest, in that group there as we did last year. The question is the higher seeds and what's going to happen there, and I think it's all going to depend on who's a 4 seed. To be honest, the 4 seed line is where I would look at for saying, hey, even, maybe 3 seed. There's going to be in other videos some teams that maybe are 14 seeds that I would like to mention, because there are 3 seeds that may have kind of lost some questionable games. There are 14 seeds there on that 3 seed line we could look at, but the 4 seed line specifically, we saw the gap there between 4 and 5. 5, I think, is going to be pretty similar to last year. 4 is where maybe we could sneak in a 13 seed upset there. Potentially. But let's finish this episode off with who actually can win it all. Now, again, this is subject to change, but we're going to go over the extensive list of what previous teams and the criteria they have met to actually be in title contention. Because I think a lot of people say this team can win the title, this team can win the title, but when we really look into it, I think it's much smaller than you actually think. The criteria, the first main one that everyone brings up, over 95% of past champions are top 21 in offense and top 29 in defense, having to be in the top of both of those. Because of the increased level of teams, like we mentioned at the beginning of the video, honestly, I think we can do top 21 in offense and top 21 in defense to be a little more strict, because the top 29 in defense only includes 1 team. So we'll move it to top 21 in both, which, as I record this, would include Duke, Michigan, Arizona, Florida, Houston, and barely Iowa State. And I would pick one of these teams to win it all without any hesitation, and that's it. I'm not kidding. One of these teams will win it, and I have no hesitation in that. Now, there are some other metrics that also go into here, and they're not necessarily specifically based on a team's play. Basically every team to have won the title has been top 12 in specifically the Week 6 AP poll, as well as being undefeated through Thanksgiving. Now, these may seem as more of a coincidence rather than a set stat, but it stood the test of time, and it's to show how teams that win the title don't necessarily win games early on. However, I wouldn't purely 1,000,000% rely on it because of the changing landscape with our scheduling. There are a lot more big-time games early on in previous years. We have those in-season tournaments that are only growing, so maybe this gets broken, but if we go based off that, it does go against Florida, as they were not in the top 12 Week 6 AP poll, nor were they undefeated through Thanksgiving. Also, it goes against Houston, who lost, I believe, the day before Thanksgiving. And now, while that may seem unfair, for, hey, like these teams, why are we going off that stupid stuff, we can also include this. It's been almost a decade since a team won and they weren't at least top 6 on one side of the ball. That was 2017 UNC was the last team. And almost every champion, aside from them, has fit this criteria as well. The only team that wasn't top 10, at least on one side of the ball, was 2011 UConn. Iowa State, even going back to them, is barely inside the top 21 offensively, but also barely outside of the top 6 defensively. And with Houston, they are 6th defensively right now, and obviously we mentioned the not being undefeated through Thanksgiving. So if I'm going to be, again, conference tournament changes this stuff. These teams could go up or down if they're right on the line there. But if they're both on the edge here, Iowa State, I would honestly just not. I'm not picking them in any of my 2 brackets. Which, by the way, that's the most I think you should do. 2 brackets, in my opinion. That's what we'll be doing here. To get, and if you do 3 or more, it's kind of like, okay, like, you're gonna hit eventually. Anything more than that's like insane. 2, I think, is the max. I am not picking Iowa State to win in any of my brackets. And technically, maybe if they barely fit the analytical stuff, they could. But because of how good the top is, I'm not. And Houston, you totally could, because they returned so many guys that almost won it last year. And I'm not going to call you crazy for that. But they are barely fitting it. And they also were not undefeated through Thanksgiving, like we mentioned, because they did lose to Tennessee. So, honestly, with all this stuff, I would be more inclined to just focus on what the 4-1 seeds are going to be. And honestly, pick one of them. Which you may hate me, but it's what we identified last year, and it literally did happen. It literally happened last year. But they would also not fit all of the criteria either. Not all of them. There is one that kind of stands out, like we mentioned. But some key stuff also to mention is if any team in any year is above 33 in KenPom, meaning I say like they're first in KenPom, they're second in KenPom, they each have a rating next to them. And as you saw on the like Evan Mia graph, you see on the side 30, 20, 10. This is like their actual rating. If any team is 33 or higher in terms of what they're actually rated in KenPom, you have to be within 5 points of that. And any team below that that's been that good, that has had someone else that's been that good, that's won it all, has to be at least within 5. And that's the same with any other site. If they are above 33, you have to be within 5 of them. The only seeds that fit that right now are Duke, who is at the top, Michigan, and Arizona. Florida is just barely outside of that right now. They could get in, but we mentioned all the previous early season stats of why they might not win it all. And if they win it all, they would have the most losses before conference play to ever win. And with their play style, they are extremely, extremely front court heavy. So they dominate the glass inside, but they shoot barely over 31% from 3, which would be one of the lowest ever to win. And definitely no one within the 2000s would even be close to that. Not to mention just how the game has changed with 3-point rate. If you pick Florida, I'm not going to disregard it, but it would surely break a lot of trends for a high majority of past champions, and is not one that I'm necessarily putting all my money on. But they did it last year, so maybe I'm crazy, but I'm not 100% sold on them. But they are definitely still in here. But the rest of these teams would fit. Duke, Michigan, Arizona. These are the main 3 I'm looking at, to be honest. Arizona being 3rd on the list, but Florida was also 3rd on the list last year for main 1 seeds, and they won it all. So Arizona, even if they're not for sure 1 or 2, they are definitely in the possibility to win it all. Their only 2 losses are in overtime to a healthy Texas Tech team, and on the road by 4 at the hardest place to play in the country, Allen Fieldhouse in Kansas. They absolutely live inside and hate taking threes. One of the highest disparities in the country for how many threes they take versus how many twos they take. But they're not poor on shooting. Around average. They just don't take it a lot. But their defense is the biggest strength. Top 3 defense, especially inside. Their bigs do a great job of making anything inside as difficult as possible without fouling. They are 2nd in the country in 2-point defense, but they've had some slip-ups in late games, like versus BYU, who they were still able to win that game. But really the only way to win is to either match their physicality, specifically with the guards like Jaden Bradley, because he is super important for them ball handling wise, or just hit your threes. And there's a risk that it's possible with teams just hitting threes that Arizona's timidness to try and match them, they don't like taking those threes, and they don't shoot bad, but they're not insanely crazy at shooting the three. So you're going to have to be pretty good at getting your threes off and knocking them down. But that could happen to any team, obviously, and they are still a very viable title team. Michigan, they are one spot higher in Arizona in offense and defense. They are similarly super efficient inside, but they do even more offensively and defensively. They're number one in effective field goal percentage defensively. The bench is much deeper than most title contending teams, and they've shown I think they've shown the most dominant stretches. Maybe Duke is in there too, but some of the most dominant stretches, especially early in the year, that we've seen from a team. It has also come with closer games than you would like because of their turnover issues. It's improved from last year, what their turnover issues was, but it's still not ideal for a title team. Now, it would be one of the largest turnover rates along with 2023 UConn. So there is a recent team that had a lot of turnovers that did win the title, who obviously was an anomaly as a 4 seed. But that top tier was much closer than normal, the 1 seeds that year. And UConn did have one of the weirder roads to a title. They beat Miami in the Final Four and then San Diego State to win it all. So little weird stuff there. And the guard play, though, is volatile for this team. Elliot Cadeau is the main guy. And, I think one can ask, can he have 5 to 6 good games in a row? He hasn't done that all year. And they also just had freshman LJ Kaysen go out for the year. But they do have a lot of guard depth from guys that have been on the team. So it doesn't kill them at all. And his up and down play hasn't been enough to lose whenever he's not 100% on, because the overall talent is just so immense with this team. They're one of the most talented teams in the country, and they can overcome some of their issues because of just how good they are. And they have the best connecting piece in the entire country, in Yaxel Lindenborg. He's the second most impactful player in the country, and he helps with so many other issues that they have. But it leads us to the best team in the country, because he's not number one. And the best team in the country has the best player in college basketball, and that's Duke, who has all the momentum, all the spotlight, and they have by far the best player in the country. And I can't emphasize how clear it is and how insane of a season he is having, as one of the most impactful and insane seasons in the history of college basketball in general. Cam Boozer, he is the life beat of this team, and he is doing all of this as a freshman. He is literally the most guaranteed thing I've ever seen. And I think, honestly, maybe anyone who's even covered this has ever seen. He has some of the most consistency just for good games in terms of stats-wise that we've ever seen. In terms of analytical metrics that like to rate players, he's among one of the best of all time, right there with like peak Zach Edey. Like the only thing is Cam Boozer does, I think, is a lot more varied in what he can actually do for Duke. Their only 2 losses are to, actual lower combined opponents than Arizona and Michigan for their 2 losses. Michigan's losses, I forgot to mention Wisconsin, but also to Duke. That was one of their losses. So they do have a head-to-head here, Duke over Michigan. But Duke's losses are to Texas Tech in December by 1 and at UNC, which it was the biggest rivalry game on a buzzer beater. So their losses are insanely close. But they're one of the tallest teams in the country. Efficiency basically all around, although they do get kind of in-game where either an opponent shoots a lot of threes that can kind of bite them, just like Arizona. They don't really like getting into games where the opponent shoots a lot, and they don't really like playing in transition. Their transition offense and defense is one of the worst in the country, and the thing is they obviously don't play in transition too much, because rarely are they running back after a missed shot or the opponent trying to run inside quickly, because of who Duke has inside with Patrick Ngumba and Cam Boozer and just the crazy height they have inside. But a team can get Duke uncomfortable by playing fast, and I think that might be the key, which Michigan did try to do that, but they had some foul troubles in that game that they played. Like we mentioned, head-to-head, neutral site, by the way, versus Michigan, and we could see them play in the title game, which I don't know, rarely do we ever see teams that meet in the title game have already met before in the regular season. So it gives us a lot of data to work off of, but as a fan, I kind of wish I didn't see that, because I want to see a first-time matchup in the title game. But the thing with Duke is, if this type of team wins it all, it would be a major outlier for key things that we think of when it comes to champions, and that's experience and continuity. This team is going against the transfer portal era, which obviously teams like that lack continuity, like Michigan, but can have a lot of experience. Ken Pom tracks these stats of experience and continuity, basically continuity, percentage of returning minutes you have, experience just on average how old or how much experience these guys have playing in college basketball. And if Duke wins it all, they would have the lowest experience and continuity to ever win a title ever. Both of them, literally both of them. And it can be a real thing to be worried of a team that is so reliant on one player. We really normally don't see champions like that. Obviously, he's one of the best players we've ever seen in college basketball. And don't get me wrong, they are still, very good without him. But if anything were to happen to him, they really fall to probably not a for sure title team in my opinion. And while you can say the same about maybe Michigan and Yaxel, it's not as much for a team like Arizona, who has been on stretches without one of their best players in Koa Pete, and they've been able to win games. So even with all that stuff that we said in the beginning about how good the top is, just like last year, there are clear issues with each of these one seeds. So picking who's going to win your bracket, obviously that's going to give you the biggest edge. If everyone picks one seed in the Final Four, you got to know who's going to make the title game and who's going to win it all. And some of these teams are more just pretty extreme with their play style than last year, that it could be susceptible for some of them to not make the Final Four. But there's also, like we mentioned, issues with all of them. So who is actually going to be the national champion? I guess you're going to have to find out in the bracket prediction video that I make, because I'm not going to reveal anything until the bracket is fully out. But keep an eye out on more vids, because there's so much more to go over. This is only part one. There's so much stuff to cover for March, so stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching. Please go ahead and subscribe if you enjoyed, to not miss the next videos that are coming out. And stay smart, stay sharp, and I will see you guys later. Peace.